Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to what is our final session or episode in this season of our journey down the road to somewhere. We'll be taking a little bit of a break over the summer and be back with our next season in the fall. And of course, I'll keep you posted both in terms of email and on Facebook. This final episode I'm calling Harleys and Hot Rods, and you'll see why that's the title to the episode in just a little bit here. But again, we're at the end of our journey on Route 66 through the state of Missouri. And actually, this particular episode of the videos that Joy and John are shooting is going to take place right on the state line between Missouri and Kansas. When we come back for our next season in the fall, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be cutting the corner of Kansas. Route 66 just goes slightly through the corner of Kansas before it drops down into Oklahoma. Actually, there's only 13 miles of Route 66 in Kansas, and because it correlates to the poetic books of the Old Testament, which there are 5 in our Bibles, we have to make 5 stops in 13 miles. So we'll be making some kind of funny little stops in some special little areas, but that will all be when we get back together and we head into Kansas. State line actually, by the way, is only about 5 miles down the road from Joplin, which is where we were last week. And when John and Joy decide that they need to shoot a video there because the longer lecture series on this particular book, that happens to be where the stop is, again, just trying to fit in the 12 books of the history of Israel from Joshua forward. And they don't know what to look, what's going to happen there. They don't know if it's just, a sign that says you're crossing into Kansas. They don't know what's going to be there to set up to shoot the video. And so it's a little bit of a pleasant surprise when they get to state line that they're, before they go into Kansas. So here's what happens, or a sign once they get into Kansas on Route 66. What they discover is that there's a saloon and restaurant there called Hogs and Hot Rods, which is where we get our title today for our episode. For those of you that aren't really maybe part of the motorcycle crowd, you might not know that Harley Davidson motorcycles are referred to oftentimes as hogs. As a matter of fact, the actual membership group that you can join if you have a Harley is called the Harley Owners Group. And again, if you look at the letters of each of those words, it forms hog. So hogs and hot rods is sort of a place where along the route that guys that are riding motorcycles, or perhaps it really doesn't have to be a hot rod. It looks pretty basic when you first see it. It actually is a little bit longer than the picture shows. But on any given day, what the parking lot might look like is this, where a group of bikers or tourists or whatever are heading down Route 66. They come to the state line, they stop here. Food is supposed to be really good. As a matter of fact, online it has 1,000 positive references for this funky little bar and restaurant. And I imagine most of those references come from Route 66 tourists. Now, when John and Joy arrive, there's actually only a couple of motorcycles sitting outside. And so they go in and they talk to the guys that own the motorcycles and convince them to be part of the video. They come out and arrange their Harleys around the Corvette, and then they stand in the background trying to look tough for the video. So when the video begins in the book, John basically talks a little bit about state line, talks a little bit about this saloon, hogs and hot rods, and then he transitions into what he's going to do in terms of a teaser for the book of the Bible, which is the final book of this history section in our Bibles, and that is the book of Esther. Now, I'm going to get back to the fact that even though Esther sits as the last book in the historical books, it actually doesn't fit there. And again, I'll explain that in just a minute. I did want to say that in the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh, that Esther is a part of the third section of their Bible, which is simply called the Writings. And within the writings, there are several subcategories, and one of those subcategories is called the five megalot. And megalot is simply the Hebrew word for scroll, and so this little section is called the five scrolls, and it contains five books of what are our Old Testament, along with Esther. There's Song of Solomon, Ruth, Lamentations, and Ecclesiastes. And it's interesting because each of these scrolls are read at a very certain time during the Hebrew year or at a certain time during a Hebrew festival, and we'll see how that ties into Esther this morning. It's actually, we think, the last book that sort of made the cut when the men that were putting together what we consider the Old Testament canon, which books should be in the Old Testament. Esther was probably the last book because there was a lot of debate about the book, simply because when you read the book, the word God or the name Yahweh does not appear anywhere in it. I happen to think that it's implicit in the text versus explicit, but there was some debate, and that's probably why it was the last one to make the cut. In the book, John, as they're shooting the video, then he gives a little bit of the background of the story. What we know about Esther is we're told that it takes place during the reign of Xerxes. Xerxes actually was the king of the Persian Empire from 486 to 465. He was the son of Cyrus, who sent back the first wave, and he was the son of Darius, who was the son of Cyrus. So Xerxes was like the grandson of Cyrus, and then he was also the father of Artaxerxes, who is the one that, of course, sends Nehemiah back to build the walls. And so really, this particular book, and again, there's some debate on the specific timing of it, but if in fact the Ahasuerus, which was the Hebrew pronunciation of what is then the transliteration into Greek of Xerxes, if in fact it's speaking of Xerxes the first, then again what happens is that this particular story kind of drops in between the building of the temple and the building of the wall, which then made Jerusalem an actual city. The place where it takes place is in the capital of the Persian Empire at that time, which is here in the city of Susa. It sits in modern-day Iran, which a lot of the Persian Empire at that time, when it first started and before it expanded to virtually the known Western world, it was a massive, as you remember, empire, but Persia itself really sat in what is modern-day Iran. The story of Esther, it's kind of a perfectly plotted story. It's real important on this particular episode that you go back and watch the longer video, because the story is It's not that it's complex, but it has a lot of really interesting elements to it, and I'll give you sort of a brief teaser in the same way that John does when they're shooting their video. But it has all the elements of a great story. It's got a good guy by the name of Mordecai, who's Jewish. It's got a villain by the name of Haman, who actually is of the line of Agag, which means he was an Amalekite. It has a heroine, and of course her name is Esther. Jewish name is Hadassah, but her Persian name is Esther, and so the book was named after her Persian name. And of course it has the king, Xerxes, and all of them they're the main characters of the story. Story really breaks down into two major parts. The first part of the story, when the book begins, really tells the story of how is it that Esther, a Jewess, becomes the wife of the king of Persia and thereby becomes the queen. And I think all of that is kind of the backstory to what the main story of the book is, which would be the second part, which is how Esther really saves the Jewish nation, not the Jewish nation, but the Jewish people that are now spread throughout the Persian Empire. She saves a Holocaust. There is a plot that we'll see in a minute here, and it's Esther who is able to step in and keep that plot from happening. You know, it's really relevant in a lot of ways when you think about it, because even if you look at what's happening in Israel today, it's really surrounded by nations that not only are hostile toward it, but as you see in some of what's going on in the news, if you're watching this currently, we're right now in May of 2024. I know some of you might be watching this, years from now. But currently, the protests that are going on about the war that's happening in Gaza and in Israel, you'll see that, part of the protesters, they don't just want a ceasefire, they want the nation of Israel to cease to exist. And so there's chants like death to Israel and death to America, and from the river to the sea, which is a reference to pushing Israel completely out of its land. So here we have an attempt we're going to see in the plot, attempt very similar to some of what's going on today. And again, just the fact that the nations that exist today that are hostile would have all been part of the Persian Empire at that time. So you've got to watch the video to kind of get the full story of this. So in a nutshell, John gives a little teaser of the book. He begins by talking about, again, how Esther wins what I'm going to call the Miss Persian Empire pageant. And by winning that contest that goes on, she really becomes, again, the wife of Xerxes and the queen. In the story, Haman, as he's first introduced, is the number 2 power in the Persian Empire. He's kind of Xerxes' a right-hand guy, again, almost like his chief of staff, you might think of, and he hates the Jews. He particularly hates our good guy, Mordecai, because in his exalted position, Haman requires everyone that he passes by to bow down and pay honor and homage to him. And Mordecai just absolutely refuses to, which enrages Haman. And then he comes up with this plot. And the plot is not simply to kill Mordecai, but what he decides is that he is going to execute or murder all the Jews in the Persian Empire. It would be a genocide. It would be a Holocaust. And in order to determine when they're going to do that, we're told that they actually cast lots to come up with a date. And in Hebrew, a lot, which is kind of like rolling dice, there were a lot of different forms to it, but it was a way of making decisions. The word lot in Hebrew is the word per, and that's going to play into the story a little bit later on also. But as they cast lots to come up with this date, again, to annihilate all of the Jews throughout the Persian Empire, the lot comes up with the 12th month of the Jewish calendar and the 13th day of that month. It happens to be when they cast lots the first month of the Jewish calendar. So basically from the time Haman begins to plot the destruction of all of the Jews till the time that the date is actually set for that to happen, it's almost a year. So there's time for events to unfold, which do inside of the book of Esther. So once the word gets out of what it is that Haman intends to do, and Mordecai hears about it, Mordecai comes to Esther. He was her uncle or cousin. It's hard to kind of tell the way it's worded, but her mother and father apparently had died when she was very young, and Mordecai has actually raised her. So he has this relationship with her, and he comes to her and pleads for her to intervene on behalf of the Jews with King Xerxes. Now, in the ancient world, and particularly, I guess, within the Persian Empire, if you approached the king without him summoning you, there was a penalty, and the penalty was death. And so Esther, if she's going to approach the king, she really is risking her life. And, when she talks to Mordecai about that, Mordecai says, well, who knows if you haven't been brought to the kingdom for such a time as this. I think that's probably one of the more well-known verses of the book of Esther. And finally, she decides she's going to do it. And then kind of the final statement that she makes to Mordecai is, and if I perish, I perish. In other words, she's willing to give her life to attempt to intervene to stop this plot to annihilate all of the Jews within the Persian Empire. She comes up with a masterful plan, and again, it is so cool that you got to watch the video. I'm not going to tell you the details on it, but she really comes up with an amazing plan on how to get a hearing with Xerxes and how to seek that he might intervene. Xerxes, by the way, does not know that she is Jewish, and he doesn't know that the people for whom he has issued a royal decree to annihilate, that it is the Jews. He doesn't know that. Haman hasn't told him that. And all of that kind of plays into how Esther is able to eventually get before Xerxes what's about to happen and to get him to attempt to change this decree that he's made. Well, the problem is that in their culture, a royal decree could not be changed. And therefore, even if he wanted to stop what has been plotted, he can't do it because he has made a royal decree for this to happen on this certain day. But he turns to Mordecai. And once he finds out that Haman is the bad guy behind all of this, he turns to Mordecai and he says, you need to come up with another plan that I can make a royal decree that will go along with this royal decree that might save your people. And I think that the plan that Esther comes up with to get to Xerxes, it strikes me that only a woman could have come up with that plan. And again, if you watch the other video, you'll see why. And I would say that the plan that Mordecai comes up with could only come from a man, because Mordecai's response is, I want you to make a royal decree that says that on this day, when the nation, the Persian kingdom, is able to seek to annihilate all of the Jews, you make a royal decree that the Jews can fight back. And that's, of course, what happens then as the story unfolds. And again, John, briefly giving a little bit of a teaser to the book, is able to tell that because of Mordecai's plan that the Jews are saved, Haman ends up getting hung on a stake that he had erected initially to kill Mordecai, and he ends up getting, basically crucified. Most of your Bibles will probably talk about gallows. They didn't hang people. They impaled them on stakes. And so Haman gets impaled. Then Mordecai becomes the king's trusted advisor. So he takes over the position that Haman had, and Esther became a Jewish hero. And this is the event that is celebrated every year and has been celebrated for over 2,500 years on the 14th and the 15th of the last month of the Jewish calendar. And that event is called Purim. And of course, it comes from the word pur, which meant lot. And so in a sense, the Purim is the feast of the lots. And going back to how it was lots that were cast to determine the date, and yet that date, or the day after that date, it becomes the date of their salvation. And so John kind of gives this brief overview, and again, when he finishes, like he always does, he encourages his audience, as I do, to watch the larger video. It's loaded. I watched it this week. In preparation every week, I go back and I watch the longer video, and which seems maybe kind of strange since I'm the one speaking, but it refreshes my mind of what's in that video, and it's really loaded, and it's a fun video. So I hope that along with watching our little episode here, that you will take advantage of the link to the longer video and to watch that. So after they shoot the video, John and Joy realize there's really nowhere around the state line for a good hotel to stay for the night. So they actually head back to Joplin, which of course is only 5 miles away, and they find a decent hotel there that has a nice swimming pool. And there's a scene in the book where they have a little bit of pool time that sort of ties into the development of their relationship. So again, you'll see all that if you watch the video. That kind of brings us to the end of this season. And again, our next stop, which will be the first stop in season 3, will be the town of Galena, Kansas. That plays a big role in the prequel to this book, in this book it'll tell a little bit of the story about why Galena is important, but it's a story that goes all the way back to the prequel to this book, in the book Somewhere Fast. And so they'll stop there in Galena as their first stop, and the first book of the poetic books is the book of Job. So that'll be a great way to kick off a new season, and I hope that you have a nice break over the summer here, and I'll be looking forward to getting back together with you in the fall. So thanks for tuning in, and again, we'll see you in the fall.